All right. Good morning. First, I'd like to introduce my panel. And we have Bill Zhao, Oxon, Alyssa Cobb, Irene, Morgan, Akosa, Jasmine, Lucy, and Serfael. And today we're going to be talking about the danger of racial slurs. So, first and foremost, what is it that constitutes a racial slur in your opinion? Lucy?
Like, it's a word that's used especially to demean somebody of a different race for no other reason than they are that race.
Any other? Alrighty. Can things that you feel are racial slurs not be racial slurs to another person?
Yes. Oh, sorry, did which way? Yes. If you are in a specific group in a community, it's like you can't. It's like certain things that you just know not to say. You know, you can't say the N-word to somebody. You know, if you're not black. You know what I mean? I personally, that's what I feel. You know, it's something that they share in the community, or so a word that they share in the community. You know, you can't go to the LGBT, community or so and say something to them, and you know, it's not going to be okay because you don't share that kind of relationship with them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Alyssa, did you have an opinion?
Yeah, I feel similarly, but I feel like also there's instances where you don't realize that you're using a racial slur, but in that community they recognize it as a slur. So I guess an example of that would be like a lot of people down south consider us Northerners Yankees, and like there's a baseball team called the Yankees, but like it's offensive to some people. Like if you called somebody down south a Yankee, they take offense to it because it's something that they consider derogatory, but they're not using it when they're referring to people that are actually from that community as in a demeaning way, but it can be received in that way.
And Akosa?
I believe that words like society have evolved, and racial slurs such as the N-word have been like how we use them in our songs nowadays. I personally feel like that's okay, and I also feel like if you are African American, then it's okay to use it in that term if it's like a song. But words have evolved in that sort of they haven't evolved in the way that you can outright call somebody a racial slur. But words have evolved that it's becoming more accepting in a certain setting, which I feel is okay, but can actually be harmful in certain ways. If you understand what I'm saying.
So there are certain things that might not be considered like racial slurs, but when people say, "Oh, you're beautiful for whatever ethnicity you are," like you're beautiful for a dark-skinned girl or you're beautiful for an Asian girl, would you constitute that as being a racial slur? Bill?
I don't think that's necessarily a racial slur. It's just racially offensive instead of a racial slur because it's not a particular term or word. It's just demeaning someone of a different race without actually using a single term.
Mm-hmm. When people say that, do you think that they're intentionally trying to be offensive? Oxon?
Yes, because like if someone says you're like beautiful for a dark skin, so that means if you're wearing a dark skin, you wouldn't be beautiful at all. So I guess for that certain skin color, you have that benefit.
Morgan?
I mean, you can take it into offense, but maybe you should tell them that doesn't sound right. You shouldn't say that because they might think it was okay to begin with, and it probably wasn't.
All right, so if people can say things without the knowledge without the intention to be offensive, then what are those people? Because I don't think you can be racist on accident. Jasmine?
I think those people are blind to society. I forgot the specific term for it, but people that like kind of just outright say it and they're like, oh, you know, well, I don't know what I did wrong. There's a lot of people that are blind to what's going around in our society. You can say it and people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you say that, and the person's like, what? Like I don't know what I did wrong, you know. So there are people that are blind to, you know, the things that are going on around them and what is and what is not wrong, you know what I mean? So I mean, I guess it can be taken in certain aspects or so, but that person isn't wrong, they just don't know better. You know, if you grow up in a community, you know, in a specifically like African American community and stuff, you know, and you come to a Caucasian community and stuff and you say something and they're like, you know, like you say like the N-word or something, they're like, what did you just say? Oh my gosh. And it's like, well, what's wrong about it? You know what I mean? Like, I can't, like, I don't see the, what's wrong with it. It's because they're so used to saying that word, they're so used to it fluently coming out their mouth, that they just don't realize, like, oh, this could be, like, it's offensive to them because they know that they're not allowed to say it. So it makes them uncomfortable. Like, well, you can say it, then, why can't I say it? You know what I mean? And then that's when that whole argument of who can say and what can't say anything.
Lucy?
So another thing, this actually happened yesterday, how convenient. So I was going to walk home, and I was talking to a friend and an acquaintance, and the acquaintance saw my Star of David necklace and asked, "Oh, you're a Jew?" And that kind of made me flinch, because, like, he didn't know that it wasn't really okay to call a Jewish person a Jew without knowing that they are okay with that, because it's generally seen, because in a lot of situations where Jewish people were oppressed and dehumanized, they weren't called Jewish people, they were called Jews. And, like, for example, and another thing, like, for a Jewish person, the Hebrew word for somebody who is not Jewish is a goy, or goyim for plural. And there's a lot of people who are not Jewish who feel offended at being called not Jewish, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I guess that in some way I can relate to it because they feel othered by it. But I mean, then again, that's what non-Jewish people have been doing to Jewish people for the past, like, 3,000 years. So I'm not really going to have a huge amount of sympathy for them. Like, I can understand that the acquaintance, he didn't know that it wasn't okay to call a Jewish person a Jew without their permission, but now he knows, and if he does it again, I'm going to be pissed.
Alyssa?
I agree with what Jasmine was saying, where people that use the racial slurs aren't, like, unintentionally aren't wrong, they're just ignorant. Because I feel like racism is taught, it's not born. Like, you're not born coming out the womb talking about, calling people the N-word or calling people, out of their name or out of what it is that they prefer to be called. But at the same time, like Lucy was saying, when you hear somebody say something that's not wrong, that's not right, you have to, like, nip it in the bud immediately. And once they know, then they're wrong. Like, as soon as they know that that's not accepted by that community, that you're offending, then once they do it again, they're out of place.
Alrighty. Who is it that you feel uses racial slurs? Morgan?
White people.
White
A
people.
lot. I'm not just saying white people use it, because black people can use it, and other races can use it as well. It's just, in my experience, I've heard white people use it the most, and each ethnic group, they carry their own set of racial slurs, but black people by far have the most.
I agree with you. I really do. I also, though, feel like it's equally us, because us African Americans, because it's like there's cultural appropriation and stuff. We have our, we get offended when a white person does something toward us, but when we do something toward them, it's okay. It's not okay on either side.
Mm-hmm.
I know how I feel when somebody, calls me, a racial slur, so, or I get some kind of, she's African American, like, let's brush her off, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I feel like black people also do, the same thing. It's like, because we had an excuse, because we were slaves at one point or so like that, they had the excuse of, it's okay now, it's okay to treat you guys like this because we didn't have this kind of freedom or so like that, when our ancestors were slaves and stuff. So now we can do whatever we want, and the rest of the world can't. I feel like it's like a lot more freedom that they feel like that they have, and I feel like we use that kind of term and context, and so to make it seem like we're the people that aren't wrong. We may not even racial slurs. We may say things like just like comments just like that in general, like, oh, well, they do this, Caucasian people do this, Asian people do this, Hispanics do this, so, like, it's not cool on anybody's part, but I do notice that that African Americans, black people, my kind, do that. They kind of simplify other races to make themselves seem important, which is equally not okay.
Bill?
Well, I think the ignorant of any race can and sometimes do use racial slurs. It's not just ignorant white people or ignorant Asian people. It's anyone of any race, because anyone can use a racial slur. So as long as you're ignorant, then I think that those are the people who do use racial slurs.
Irene?
I agree with Bill. I think there's like three main types of people who use racial slurs, and that's racist people, ignorant people, and people who are trying to reclaim the word. And a lot of the time, people who are racist and people who are ignorant, those lines kind of blur. Because like you never really know whether or not somebody has known about like the history of a word and its derogatory meaning. But in the case of people who are reclaiming the word, obviously it's only people who use the word who are of that targeted ethnic group. And I know that's a little bit controversial, and I don't really have an opinion on that, but I feel like those are the three contexts in which slurs can be used.
Alrighty, so do you all believe that if a racial slur is used by someone of the same race, is it still considered a slur? Akosa?
In certain situations, yes, in certain situations, no. Unfortunately, I have been in a situation where I've been called an N-word by someone who actually meant it in the literal sense of the N-word. But then you have the N-word in songs, and you have the N-word in, it's become a part of the culture almost. So, yeah, it's okay in certain situations, but it's not okay in other situations. And even then, sorry, never mind, sorry.
Raphael?
I mean, I think even with the same ethnicity or race, you can be a racist like in some way against like your own kind. It just it differs because it kind of depends where that person grew up or what kind of background that person has. All black people don't have the same background. So, for example, like me myself, I don't have the same background as you guys. Like, I'm African, but I'm not like American right now. If you get what I'm saying. So like, I'm still black, but I can't really understand what the whole thing is about. But I can understand it in another way, like in my own way, which was my own country problem, stuff like that. So I think it's all about empathy. Like, even if you're black on black or white on black or whatever with a religion, race or whatever, like if people are ignorant or if they have some kind of sympathy, like they can understand each other. Like that doesn't mean somebody won't be a racist, but if that person has a little mind or a little space in his mind to change or to have some kind of empathy or to have some kind of knowledge, like how his words or what he's saying affects another person, I think that might help a lot. But I mean, it differs, as I said, as a person. Like, there are a lot of close-minded people, like, and they're not born that way. But
Alrighty. So now we're going to take a deeper look into the effects of racial slurs. So, how is it you feel when you're called a racial slur? If you would like, you may share what you've been called and your experience. Lucy?
So in the spaces I frequent online, there's often a lot of anti-Semitic hate blogs that the staff of the website do absolutely nothing about, which pisses me off to no end, word choice. And I see people calling people the K slur, the N word, and like a lot of other racial slurs. And I feel bad because for some of them, like, I am not the target. If I see somebody like calling somebody else the N-word, not in like a colloquial way, but like in an overtly racist way, I will feel bad. I was like, hey, that's not cool, but I know that it is not directly affecting me because I do not have a personal history with that word. But for example, when somebody calls somebody else the K word, then it's like, it feels like a punch to the gut because you're like, oh, well, this stuff it's not supposed to exist anymore. Like, you feel like, oh, you're past that. And when, like, I was little, I thought, oh, yeah, the anti-Semitism, that's in the past now. Like, people aren't hateful towards Jewish people anymore. And the answer is that, yes, they are. And it sucks to just sort of, like, see a reminder of that people hate you for who you are.
Jasmine?
Personally, when I've been called out, like, of my name and stuff like that racially, I I don't really have like a response to it unless I know it's negative, you know. I've had people say that to me before. It's like that. When I was, it actually happened when I was younger. I used to live in New Jersey, and I went to this predominantly white school. And I remember wanting to play with the girls on the playground, and they wouldn't let me play with them. And when I asked why, they were like, "It's 'cause you're black." I'm like, what? You know, like I'm only like 5, 6 years old, but I remember like it was yesterday. It just meant so much to me, you know. And growing up, I stayed around people that were not really my color, you know, until I got to Maryland and got to see, you know, people that were my color, you know. So it was like having that one thing or so like that, it stayed with me for the rest of my life. As I got older, I didn't really see it as much unless I went into a community where I, you know, actually got somebody to, you know, say, you know, something like just utmost disrespect, you know. And it's like personally, I felt like, you know, what in your mind makes it think that, you know, makes it, you think that it's okay to say this to me? You know, I did nothing to you. I did nothing to the person, but apparently they just didn't like that. I moved into a community where it was predominantly white people, you know. This was actually this year, so, you know, so they felt like it was okay to be able to say that to me. And I'm like, it hurt because it's like, you should be past this kind of stuff right now, you know. You should be mature enough not to say things. Now, if I have a relationship with somebody that's outside of that race and they say that kind of thing to me, that's different. But if you know that you're trying to be ignorant and you know that you're trying to be rude, it's not okay at all, you know. It's a difference between having that kind of relationship with people and just kind of brushing it off because that's how you guys talk and act. But then there's also a difference of, you know, having somebody say it and they know what they mean, you know. And then after, when you say, you know, like when you bring it to their attention is, oh, well, you guys say it, you know, it's okay when you guys say it, because I have that kind of relationship with that person. I don't have that relationship with, you know, you can't say that. It's wrong, you know. So personally, I felt, you know, that it's wrong. You just don't do it. You should know better, honestly.
Kosa, how do you feel?
Now, this might be a little bit similar, but I have lived in majority white neighborhoods for almost my entire life. And I've gone to majority white schools for almost my entire life. So, yes, I've been called the N-word, and especially when I talk about my parents and they ask where are your parents from, and they say, and I tell them they're from Nigeria. And, something, I don't know what it was, but I remember in middle school, it was like the whole thing about go back to Africa. Go back to Africa, that type of stuff. Even though I was born here. So how are you telling me to go back to a country that I've never been? It's like that was one of the worst things that's happened to me, especially in middle school. And it doesn't. It's from the people who you least expect it to, because like I said, I grew up in a majority white neighborhood. You would not expect your neighbors who you break bread with at church, or who took care of you when you were a little kid, to be racist to you. And unfortunately, I have had that experience. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Irene?
Right. There's like a certain shock value to any time you experience something racist, whether it's a slur or not. And that's because, like, for most of us, when we go to this school, it's a pretty diverse environment, and we don't really encounter racism on a day-to-day, like, schedule. But when you do experience it, it, like, immediately puts you in this place where you know to that other person you're less, and somehow you're not as human to them. And it's incredibly demeaning, and to be thrust into that sort of environment when you don't really experience it super often is really, like, disconcerting, and it's upsetting.
Alyssa?
I think it's not only upsetting, but it makes you feel detached from the community. In my case, I was coming out of middle school, and it was a community which I thought that, or I was coming into high school. I came from a predominantly black middle school, but I grew up in, you know, a very diverse community, and so I was comfortable in all environments. But someone thought that they were able to make me feel more comfortable by using a language that I would be more accustomed to. And so when they called me out of my name, I didn't feel like I was being included into the community like they thought that they were including me, but I felt like they recognized me as something other than and something less than at the same time by feeling like they had to stoop down to my level to use a language that I would be more used to, based on the color of my skin and like where they knew I was coming from. So I feel like it makes you, when you use a racial slur outside of the community that you're in, like you might not realize that it's not just words. Like any word can be used in a context, positive or negative. Like you can say that somebody's a moron and you can mean it casually and it might not offend that person, but somebody with a mental disability is going to be strongly offended by that because that's something that they're challenged by. That's something that they're working through. So I feel like it just makes you feel detached, and other people can't necessarily relate to that when it's not coming directly to them.
Sophia?
Yeah, I was just gonna say like, I came here like on September, like almost 9 months ago. So the first school I went to was Glen Allen, which is in Virginia. It was actually like a predominantly like white people school. When I got there, I actually like didn't realize, like, I know the history and stuff like that. We've learned it back in Ethiopia, but like I didn't really know like how the situation was live and face to face. But like when I got there, it wasn't like, it was really, really hard for me to blend in, if you know what I mean. So like my English wasn't that good, and I'm really good at like maybe math and other science and stuff like that, but they didn't really see that because I was from Africa and they thought I didn't know anything somehow. And I constantly had like, everybody was kind of rude, not in a sense rude, but they were always trying to make me feel like lower. They were trying to like, oh, so this means, oh, and this is, oh, and like, even the simple stuff. And that's just like, it's in my face. I'm really proud of I'm really, really proud of it, and I don't want to hide anything. I'm from Ethiopia. I'm always saying that. And they literally assume that I don't know anything. So like, I don't want to be offended to that, because I just knew like, no, I had to work harder in order for them like not to say that. So maybe by getting a good grade in that class, and maybe the teacher calls you out, and I just want for them to see that. And the bad thing about that was I sat right next to the guy like that was always pushing me, and it was always pushing my buttons, and I was like, okay. But I don't want to be offended, because like I didn't grow up in a democratic or free country. Like it was really hard. Everything you say is like really hard. It's gonna be count against you, and you don't have free opinions. And even in my house, it's not as a different kind of situation. You can't really say what's in your mind. You have to like kind of show it, or you have to find a way to express that. And you can't really say like, oh, you're doing this, I don't like it. You can't say that. So growing up in that kind of world, in that kind of country, like makes you kind of find a situation to make it better, or to make yourself better, or to push yourself in another situation. And I don't think I can change people's mind by just saying that to them, like, oh, you racist, don't do that. I don't think that it's gonna change them. It's just gonna make them like, yeah, they're not gonna show that to you like face to face, but they're still gonna expect that. So in order for them not to believe that, I think you just have to find a way to not make them, but like find a way to make yourself better is in many other situations. Yeah, but no one is like, it's not possible to make everybody happy. It's just like, even with their color or whatever, it's not always, and you don't have to expect like you have to make people always happy.
Do you think that it's fair that you have to like prove yourself to people to make them respect you? Alyssa?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't think it's fair, but I think that it's the reality of society, and I feel like as a black person, you have to work harder to prove yourself in academia, but in other contexts, other people have to prove themselves as harder workers, or as more loyal people. There's communities that are demeaned for being stereotypically liars or cheaters or thieves or mean people. And I think that you can't change what people are going to think about you without showing them, because actions are worth more than words. And so you can say, that's not nice what you said to me, and that makes me feel belittled. But to change what people think about a group of people, you have to show them that that group of people is not what you think.
Jasmine?
I remember being in 8th grade, and I remember being in my geometry class, and my teacher, I forgot what she was, but I know she was like mixed or something. And she said, I just want to bring something to everybody's attention. Everybody in my class, except 2, maybe 3 people were black. And she brought up BCPS or so, and she went to like all the people that like worked in, I guess, like the county or something like that. And there was, names of the people. Most of them, were white or something like that, and only a few of them were black. And she said, now I want you guys to look at the names, like how they're, brought up or something like that, right? It told like us like what degree the person had in college. And every single black person that was there had a higher degree than the people, than the, white people or something like that, that worked in the county or so. And she said, don't you guys find it strange that it seems like the black people have to work a lot harder in order to get to, where they want to be? And it's like, personally, like white people are just given, the chance to do this, like, oh, you're qualified, so you can just go in or so, And that's how I felt when I saw that, I feel like as a black person, you constantly have to prove to everybody else that you're not dumb, We have people in our community that do some really some really like wrong things, but at the same time, just because they do wrong things does not mean that everybody is, like just doesn't have a mind, Those people, they do things because that's the way that they were brought up. And it's not like, oh, they don't have any home training, but some people just don't know better, But it's like, at our expense, it's like, not everybody is, unintelligent, Not every black person you see is, just gonna sit in class and not do anything, It may seem like that or so because of what our community is, but that's not, what we are. We're not all about making rap music, We're not all about, no offense, but I'm gonna get real, like women being in strip clubs and dancing and stuff, We're not all about, being gangsters and thugs, as people call us, That's not who we are, We have people that represent that culture. We also have white people that represent that culture too. Does that make them gangsters? Does that make them thugs? You know what I mean? No, it just makes them people with mental problems, people that don't know what they're doing, people that are on the wrong path. But for us, it's wrong. They should be incriminated. They're doing this. When I walk into a hair store, when I walk into any store or so, and it's owned by a Caucasian person or so, I get looked at the wrong way. Because it's like, why are they in here? I remember walking into I forgot what it was, but I went to this like really expensive restaurant with somebody like years ago with my family or so. And my family is black or so. And when we came in there, everybody kind of looked at us like, why are they here? Because my family had, on that side of the family, my family had money, Don't expect us not to have anything. Don't expect us not to, have, anything for ourselves and stuff just because of the color of my skin. Just because the color of my skin, it doesn't mean that I'm broke. Doesn't mean that I, have anything. Some days I may walk into school with my hair sticking all over my head. That doesn't mean that I don't have anything, It doesn't mean that I'm less than a person than everybody else is, They said that black people are a lot stronger, when it comes to strength. Oh, it's because they were on the fields and this is that. I've heard that kind of stuff. It's wrong, you don't say that kind of stuff to people, especially when you have no idea what their background is. You know what I mean? I never had to, tell somebody, something like that. But it's sad that nowadays in our community, racism is still here. It should not be ignored. Like, it's still here. And I'm tired of people saying it's over with, because it's not, I see it all the time, and I hate it. I hate it so much. It's like, it's just, how can you, in your mind, sit there and say something about a person that you have nothing, like, no knowledge about their background, whether it's Asian, black, Caucasian, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's like, just because of the way that they look, it's wrong. Just because of their last name or just because of their first name or something like that, it's like they just take us as it's just like everybody, it's as people that are not, our kind or so, just take us as if we don't belong with them. And I'm tired of not feeling like I belong. You know, I don't know how many other people feel that way, but I'm tired of not, of being in a space where I'm uncomfortable and I have to shield what I say because other people are going to be uncomfortable of who I am.
I just want to explore something real fast. What is the definition of your kind? Because I'm Jamaican and Trinidadian, and my family has never worked on a field in their entire life, but I'm still, black. So what is the definition of your kind? And is that truly representative of the people that you're surrounding yourself with? Oxon.
It's more like whoever has the same skin color. So like if you're brown, they're just gonna be like, oh, you're African. Just assuming because how tan you are.
Lucy.
I think it depends, because so on my dad's side is Jewish, and my mom is a French immigrant, and so by your kind, I'm rarely called that, but I never even know what they're talking about. Are they talking about French people? Are they talking about immigrants? Are they talking about people with Cuban descent? My grandmother's Cuban. Are they talking about Jewish people? And but more often than not, it's going to be either because my mom's an immigrant or because I'm Jewish. And mostly because I'm Jewish. And it just kind of feels, because yes, we are a culture, we are a unified people, but don't call us that. It's not your kind. It's not even oh, your culture, it's your kind. What does that mean? It's such a prickly issue, and it's different for everybody.
Alyssa?
I feel like we're naturally drawn to people that look like us, whether that's your skin color, how you wear your hair, how you dress. But I think that it's okay to see that there are kinds of people. There are people that are more sociable. There are people that are more shy. There are people that are athletic, and it's okay to recognize who people are and what people look like. But I think it's something totally different for someone from the outside to define. Who has the right to tell me what my kind is? If I'm, if a person is mixed and I appear to be, this, that, and the other thing, who are you to tell me that you're black or that you're African American or that there are people all over the world that are brown skinned that aren't African American, that they've never lived in America, that they've never, but people there's such a stigma associated with being called black that we use this term African American. There are people in Europe that Americans call them African Americans. They're not American. They never have been and never will be. But there's something that we feel is wrong with saying that there are differences between us, and that we have to put them in groups. It's okay to define yourself and to say this is who I am, this is who I've made myself to be. But it's unacceptable, I think, to tell people what group they are and to define their kind.
So do you think that the titles that we use on things like standardized tests, when you have to fill in the box, Asian, Latino, African American, do you think that those limit us?
Yes. Personally, I do. I don't like being, I may say African American, but I say it because it's what we're identified as. Sadly enough, it's what we're identified as. Personally, I don't identify myself as African American. I identify myself as black, I'm not, African or something like that. I'm pretty sure maybe if I went on Ancestry.com, I would probably have, some kind of, background, from there, so like that, just knowing who my family is. But me personally, I'm not African. I'm American. I'm black. I'm a black American. My skin color is brown, but we're identified as black, I'm not, from over there. You can't say African American because I wasn't from Africa and then came over here, that's not who I am. I want to be identified as something, as black. And I know that they say black or African American, but I don't like how they say that. I think it should be one option is black and then one option is African American, and then after they say Hispanic descent and stuff like that, you know what I mean? It's different things like that. But personally, I don't feel that, being called African American for myself is okay. Now, nowadays, do I say it? I say it because it's appropriate, and I say it because that's what people feel comfortable saying in certain professional settings, But I don't feel like I should limit myself from calling myself what I really am. Why should I limit myself from calling myself black and people look at me like, oh my gosh, she just called herself black. That's what I am. That's who I am. I'm not gonna call myself African American because that's not who I am. That's not, that's not my origin. That's not where I came from. I know myself as a black American. I know myself as my own black history. Not that my ancestors came from Africa. I know, who my family is, and personally, we don't come from that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure I do, but me personally, I don't want to be identified as African American if I'm not. That's not me.
All right, we got a little sidetracked off of racial slurs, but it's okay. I like the conversation. How do you think that racial slurs affect the person who's actually saying them? Like, do they get a kick out of, being that person to say those things? Bill?
Well, I think they just think that it's what you should do, what it's appropriate, when all they're doing is showing their ignorance. I don't think they get a kick. I think that all they're doing is demonstrating that they think they're better, that they're inherently something that's not true, and by doing that they're demonstrating that. But in reality, all they're doing is demonstrating their ignorance.
Alyssa?
I think that I agree with Bill, but I also feel like in some communities it's used to not to put people down, but they can also feel like they're trying to include themselves. Like if, like I was saying, I went to a predominantly black middle school, so we had very few white kids, and if they were trying to include themselves in a community that wasn't, what they appeared to be, I mean, if they were trying to use the N-word or if they were trying to say certain things, people got offended by it, but at the same time, they were just trying to feel like they were a part of something that they didn't have another community to be connected to.
Morgan, do you have any opinion?
Well, it's like, I don't know, because I know that sometimes when people say it, like Alyssa said, they could just think, oh, they're doing it, maybe I should do it. But then other times it's like, if I were to call a white person a cracker, people would think, oh, it's funny, ha ha ha. But it's like, that's still a racial slur to him or her, and like, it still shouldn't be said.
All right, so how do you think that we can change for the better to make everyone feel more inclusive and to maybe stop offending people? Lucy?
I think that the first step is education, because sometimes people will say things and they won't even know that what they're saying is not something that they should say. Like a white person or a non-black person will say the N-word and they won't know that it's not okay for them to say that. And so I think that that's where the first step is. It's like education. Like if somebody says something that's a racial slur, whether or not you were the one who's personally affected by it, just say like, hey, that's not okay. You're not part of that group. That slur isn't yours to reclaim. Don't say that. And if they're like, oh, whoops, okay, I didn't know, I won't do it again, then it's okay. If they're like, oh, well, what's your business telling me what to say? It's a free country. Then you know that they're a jerk.
Akosa?
I completely agree with that, but I agree completely that education is the way to go. But I don't see it ending in our lifetime. I don't see it ending in our offspring's lifetime. Racism has been around forever, and it didn't start with slavery. It didn't start with any other event that I can't think of right now. But it has been around forever and will continue to be around for a long time until something inherently changes. I forgot who said something about home training, but home is where it starts from. And unless you change how parents bring up their children, and this is universal, not just white people, black people, whatever. This is for everybody. Unless you change how parents bring up their children, and until their children realize that just because I'm dark doesn't mean that I'm dirty. Just because I'm Hispanic doesn't mean that I work in the grapevine, something like that. Until you raise children to understand that just the color of your skin doesn't really matter, that you can do anything regardless of the color of your skin, then racism will continue to run rampant throughout society.
Stefan?
I actually really like the first part, like when he said it's not only about slavery and black people and white people. I think, as Jasmine said earlier, I don't think it's about African American. I think African, like everybody with African ancestry has been at some point of their life been oppressed. And I truly say that because everyone has been oppressed, like literally everyone. I don't think anyone with an African background weren't oppressed at some point of their life. So being African American is not like, don't hold it against yourself. I mean, don't hold it, I'm black, but I don't think you should say I'm not African American, because I think it's like African means it's a point of like, it's a point of our origin. I mean, I'm not totally from Africa, but I have some kind of other, my ancestry is not purely African, but I'm still, I don't want to be like, I don't want to say I'm purely African or I'm not that kind of person, but I get what you're saying. It's like, I'm closest to this and I'm born here, but I don't think you have to be like well-rounded about your ancestry and like how your other people came here and all the stuff, like your grandfathers, all the stuff, like, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, and about like the thing he said, yeah, I think it's really, really good. I don't think it's gonna end. It's never gonna end. At some point of their life, our life is not our life, but like it's gonna change into another thing. Maybe it's not gonna be white and black. It may be another thing, maybe against another. But being ignorant and all, in its shape is not gonna be. It's not gonna be final. It's just gonna change shapes or change ways. It's not gonna end.
Irene?
He's like absolutely right, because just like human beings as social animals, we want to be able to label people, and we want to be able excuse me, to label ourselves. So as long as like that exists as part of our psychology, things like racism and things like discriminatory attitudes, they're not going to go away. They might evolve with education. There might come a time in like a century or maybe two where like racism is a thing of the past and people consider it like the same way that people considered sexism, like people consider sexism now compared to like the way it was 50 years ago. But we still enjoy having an identity, and we still enjoy having like a people and a background to come from. And as long as you have that in the human race, there's always going to be a certain underlying sense of like, we're different. And ultimately, it would be ideal for like everybody to recognize that none of that matters, and ultimately what matters is that you're a human being. But you can't, it's also not right of somebody to say that you should take that away from someone. So it's difficult, and because of just like the way that we are naturally, I don't think it's possible for it to go away. But it can absolutely get better than the way it is now.
Jasmine?
I feel like racism, like, Raphael. But I for real, I personally feel like it's not gonna go away. You can try, you can, beat somebody over the head with it. It's not gonna go away. As long as people are set in their ways, as long as their upbringing, as long as they see it every day. And the media, of course, makes it very easy for people to be able to have their personal opinions and hide behind a screen and not be able to say it out loud, But as long as we have, these different alternatives into getting what our race, how racism means, like what racism means to us and stuff. Personally, I don't feel it's gonna go away. I don't feel that people really understand what kind of effect that it has on other people's lives. It may go in one ear and out the other, but at that time, over time, it starts to build up, but you really start to think, like, is this all that I am? Am I really going to be identified for my race, for the rest of my life? When I put in a college application or a job application and they ask me, are you, this color or so like that, are you this ethnicity, is the main reason why they're not, taking me in, or the reason they're taking me in to, up their stats or just keep my kind of weight, So I personally feel it's never gonna go away, no matter how you bring, somebody up in, their upbringing and stuff like that, it's going to be the same. People are going to notice that they're different than other people. People are going to notice that some people's hair are curlier than others, Some people are taller, some people are bigger, They're going to look at each other and they're going to be like, you're not the same as me, and I don't like it because I'm so used to being set in my ways and in my community. So I'm going to discriminate you and put you out of my territory, you know. So it's never going to go away, in my opinion. It's always going to be around, and I don't feel like there's nothing we can do about it.
Bill?
Well, I agree with the other commentators that racism will never go away. I think it's going to become more marginalized. I think it's going to become irrelevant in the distant future because racism and other forms of discrimination exists because of a us versus them mentality. It exists because people, they're ignorant. They don't have everything they want, and they want someone to blame. And because of that, as economic progress continues and everyone has a better life, as education continues, we'll be able to destroy the roots of which discrimination, of which racism comes from. And so in the distant future, I think we can see that racism has become almost irrelevant. But right now, we see a lot of racial divide in America. We see how, I think it's getting better, but the main thing is that because it's getting better, the racists, they need to come out now instead of in the future where they become less powerful. So that's why we're seeing all of this today instead of in the past or in the future.
All right, I have 2 questions for you guys. So the first question is about education. I heard from several speakers that education is really the way to make progress. Well, if we're starting education from basic home training, is there anything that we can do about what we have right now? As high schoolers especially, most of what you've learned, most of your morals have already soaked in, and that's about as much as you're ever going to get. Is there anything that we can do to change the people in our generation? And the second question, which I'm going to have you guys answer simultaneously because we're running up on time, is with what Bill was saying about how these the racism that we have is being perpetuated now. Do you think that our First Amendment right to freedom of speech is really helping racism to grow in our country? Because if you look at countries like Germany, where talk of Nazism and Nazi flags and Nazi symbols and things like that are outlawed, they don't have the same type of racial issues that we have. Akosa? Oh.
Could you repeat the first question?
The first question was, how can we change our high schoolers and our adults who already have their morals set in if we're trying to change education at a young age? Is there anything we can do to sort of save our generation?
Well, I think that it is definitely possible for older people. I think it definitely is possible for older people to learn, and that's why it bugs me whenever like an old person is being racist or sexist or homophobic, and somebody's like, oh, well, they're just old. It's how they were brought up. But it is always possible to learn that something that was ingrained from you from a young age is wrong. Like my mom, she was and generally still is a pretty ignorant person about a lot of things, but it is definitely, but like I'm still trying to get her to understand things that from her position of privilege, it's harder for her to understand. And I don't think that being an adult, that being old, even that being elderly, I don't think that that is an excuse for being bigoted.
Akosa?
I completely agree with what I was going to say, that being an adult doesn't give you an excuse to not open your mind to, not to learn that things change, that things have changed, and that racism should be in the past, but unfortunately it isn't. So it's just, while it'd be ideal that we could change our generation, and it does look like we're changing our generation, but in reality, we're changing parts of it. We're not changing the whole thing, unfortunately, because everybody can't change. It just doesn't happen. Unfortunately, while it'd be ideal, it just doesn't happen. But unless it's like a mind-boggling experience, it gets harder as you age to accept new things. Like when you're a child, this is why I was talking about home training from children. It's your parents or people who you live with influence you the most. So that's where that home training comes from. Not so. I feel like once you've got to high school, college, you're a young adult. You've become, like you said, so soaked into so set in your morals that you don't want to change because it's who you've become. And then to answer your second, I forgot your second question.
It was about the First Amendment right to
Right.
freedom of speech.
With the whole outlawing of the Nazi flag, like we've outlawed, well, there are certain states here in the United States that have outlawed the Confederate flag, but you still see how the First Amendment can be a blessing and a curse. You see how you have people who choose to be overtly racist or sexist or bigoted through the new modes of communication that we have via the internet, whether it be on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. But then you see the people who come out to condemn them, who come out to say, who go online and be like, you should not be saying this, you are a terrible person, if you really want to say come out the shadows, and you're getting called out for that. So it's putting them in their place. So the First Amendment, I do believe that hate speech should not be free speech. I believe that. And the First Amendment really is a double-edged sword.
Morgan?
Well, for the first question, you can't change anyone but yourself, but I think you can try and teach people different things and maybe say, like we were talking about earlier, maybe they didn't know that they didn't feel like they were saying a racial slur. You could talk to them about it and say, hey, it's not cool. But then if they keep doing it, yeah, they're being ignorant. And then for the second, I agree with the COSA. It's like hate speech shouldn't be hate speech.
Sophia?
Yeah. So for the first one, like for adults, that's so very hard for them to change. I think it's just if they want to change, I think it's the most important thing is for them to want to change. If they want to, I think they can change easily. But the problem is they don't want to change. As they age, they just don't want to change. I think their belief is just they think it's right, and I've experienced this a lot, in my family too. Like as they age, they think all their beliefs is really right. So like, even if you tell them, they're not gonna understand you because they don't want to understand you. They first of all, they don't want to understand what you're saying. They just want to because they have more experience than people in our age, or maybe you know, like as they age, like it's really different. Like there's a big generational gap like between us and like our parents or our grandparents. So like it's really hard for them to change because I don't think they have even an open mind to change. I'm not saying all of them, but especially like this racist people, they're pretty close-minded, so it's really hard for them to change. But you don't really have to, as Akosa said, like it's really hard. If they continue to do that, we can't really, even if we homeschool, they're being homeschooled by that person, like by the racist parent. So it's gonna be like, you're just gonna continue the cycle. It's gonna be round and round. So it's really hard. I don't know what the solution is. And for the Second Amendment, I don't think outlawing is a good thing, to be honest. Like because even if you outlaw, it's just gonna be knee deep, and people are not gonna say what they feel, but they're just gonna hold it in. And I think that's a very bad thing, to hold what you feel, because the moment you want to say that thing and the moment you want to share it, it's just gonna be really bad. And I think if you outlaw it, you're not gonna see it in front, but you're gonna see it deep down. That means it's gonna go to your child, grandchild. It's never gonna end. It's just gonna pass. The feeling is gonna pass. And I don't think outlawing it. I think he said like hate speech isn't free speech, but I don't think they know it's a hate speech. So.
Alyssa?
For the first question, I just feel like the best way to change people that are already beyond, like you said, like developing their morals or whatever, the best way to address that would be to show the impact that it's having on the people that are important to them, or the people that are close to them. So like if you show that, like, you know, this is what you could have been, you know, 200 years ago as a woman, even as a white woman, like 200 years ago, you would not have had the rights or the capabilities or the equality, you know, even though it's not completely equal now, that you have today. So why would you deny somebody else that same thing? And so showing them that this is what your children are going to go through, you know, even if they're not being the ones that they see as being put down, I think it's important to show the possibility of creating a better community, whether that's, you know, whether you feel like you're a minority or a person that's being put down, and you feel like you can unify yourself with the larger community to raise your children up for a better environment, or you feel like you're somebody that's elevated and you can, you know, raise other people up to create more opportunities, because everybody benefits from equality. Everybody benefits from, you know, because people have things to contribute that would never be voiced without, you know, everybody being on a level playing ground. And the second question with the First Amendment, I definitely agree. I disagree with Akosa about the hate speech shouldn't be free speech, because I feel like it, like what you were saying, it festers. If you tell people that they can't say something, then what they're going to do is they're going to create, you know, secretive groups, or they're gonna say things anonymously, or they're going to not say things directly. But when you don't say something directly and you let it build up, then when it comes to the time that they're just fed up with it and they don't want to deal with it anymore, it bursts, and that leads to violence. And I think it leads, when things break out in violence, it leads to more divide than unity. And I think that's a dangerous thing.
Bill?
I think that you can try to convince someone who's ignorant to change their ways, but it's very hard to convince someone who's actually racist. When you look at ignorant people, they're ignorant because they don't know. So by telling them that well, showing them the facts, showing what impact they've made, what impact that racism has made, and how racism isn't a good thing. You show them the facts, show them the statistics, show them personal experience, then you can actually convince those people that racism isn't good. But the people who are racists, they're not just ignorant, they're just racist. You can't convince them. It's very hard. You have to smack them again and again with evidence that racism isn't true, that you shouldn't be racist, and they might still not be convinced because they're so set in their ways. And for the second point, I completely agree with what the previous two speakers have said. I think free speech is free speech. Even hate speech should be free speech. When someone makes a hateful speech, which is like not true, it's stupid, then we can tell them that it's not true, it's stupid. We should be able to tell them why it's not true. We should be able to tell them that what you're saying is false. And by doing that, we can convince other people who used to listen to these people that racism isn't like good. It's not backed by evidence. It's not good. When you look at countries like Germany, which have banned racism, well, not racism, but like Nazism and things relating to Nazism, then you look at their political situation. They've had a far-right party rise up in the previous years, Alternative for Deutschland, and it's somewhat similar to the Nazis. And because they've been held down so long, the government and the people of Germany have been unable to convince the people who are leaning to that party that racism is bad, and they've gained 20% of the vote, which is astonishing in a Western democratic country like Germany.
Irene?
Sorry, but Alyssa and Bill are right. People who are exercising their right to hate speech, they're doing it just as much as people who are exercising their right to condemn that hate speech are. Which means that the only real solution that doesn't create like a sort of political environment that fosters something like Germany is when you have a country where people are socially condemning that kind of behavior. Because that's the only way that any sort of change is going to be effective. I don't really like the idea of like outlawing something like that, because it kind of feels like you're just sort of pushing it under the rug. And that might not necessarily be true, but if you outlaw it and you forbid it in a way that like discussion is forbidden, then the people who maybe are a little bit more prone to that kind of behavior, who are a little bit more prone to like being ignorant and racist, they're never going to have the opportunity to like act that way and then be educated and corrected. Because everybody has that opportunity to change. And if you never realize that there's a problem in the first place, then you can't change.
Akosa?
When I said that hate speech shouldn't be free speech, I meant that it shouldn't be okay. I didn't mean that it shouldn't be. I didn't mean that it should be outlawed. I just wanted to clarify that. Sorry.
Alyssa?
I thought about something. I think Irene was saying like about society being able to condemn things and like being able. Was it Bill had said like being able to be called out about the things that you said. Oh no, it was saying like in social media, like people are able to be called out and whatever. I think a great example of that is what happened with Roseanne this past week, and like her show being canceled because of what she posted. She even used a racial slur in there, referring to the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes, degrading President Obama's chief of staff or something like that. But things like that, like where society as a whole can say that something is not okay, it doesn't disallow people from having the freedom of speech. She has every right to say what she said, but it doesn't make it right. And society being able to say that what you did is wrong, what you did is going to be punished, and what you did will not be an example for other people, is a way that we can limit the racial slurs. It's a way that we can kind of try to change people that already have developed their own personal ideas, and it's a way that we can still allow people to have their speech.
All right, and to wrap up our panel, we're going to do a very quick round robin. If you don't know what a round robin is, everyone gets to voice their opinion, and just any final notes on racial slurs. We're going to go from Bill back and then down to Oxon. You can just go whenever the last speaker is finished. So Bill, would you start us off?
What am I supposed to be?
Just about any last thoughts on racial slurs?
Well, I think the discussion has been thought-provoking, and I think that racial slurs are bad.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I said most of the things that I wanted to say, but I think it's important to just recognize that any word can be used in a demeaning way, but certain words can be especially angering or uncomfortable for certain people. So be aware of your environment, but also be aware of people that are using racial slurs, why they're using it. Try to get to the root of it. Don't just be offended by it, and don't just walk away from it. You have to confront the issue.
Yeah, I agree. And for people who are offended and who experience things like racial slurs and discrimination often, there's nothing that you can really do about it except for continue to express through your behavior your beliefs and try to get other people around you who are important to you, who you have some measure of influence over, to understand that as well. And you can't change in somebody what their mother saw fit not to change,
Just to talk about it, that's all I can say. I mean, what they said, same, but also you should talk about it with your teachers and your peers and your family.
This has been a really fruitful discussion, and now what's next for us to do is to act upon it. It's to take our experience and share it with not only each other, but for whoever's watching this, that for you to take this to heart, that though there may not be an end to racism for the entire population of the world, you can change at least one person. And it may be somebody who you least expect, but the tide is turning, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think it's been a really good conversation, and I think we shared our opinion and what I think we're all assemble how our age thinks, and it's just if we talk about it, if we're comfortable talking about it, I think it's gonna be good eventually. Being comfortable is important.
I think it's important to learn from the past and to learn what happened, what signs of leading up to something were. That way you can, like I said before, you can nip it in the bud. You can stop it early before it grows and grows and grows to something that's even more dangerous.
Personally, racism is wrong, but racial slurs are worse. So, you say racial slur to me or I'll put you in your place.
Racism should be, it shouldn't be here at all, and people should know that it should be fixed with education and the way you carry yourself.
Thank you very much to my panel. And I hope you all have a great day, and I'm glad this conversation was very fruitful for you all.